From the war-born to the rulers of the region of Ultramar, here's your look at the brand new McFarlane toys. Warhammer 40,000, the Ultramarines Terminator. They are amongst the greatest heroes of mankind, clad in abominable tactical dreadnought armor. The right to use this suit of armor is the highest honor uphold to the veteran space marine. Equipped with teleportation devices, Terminators can deploy almost anywhere on the battlefield. No foe is safe from their assault. Teleporting in from the battle terrain before, of course, we get a closer look at the brand new McFarlane Toys Warhammer 40,000 Ultramarines Terminator. I'd like to thank the folks over at McFarlane Toys that were kind enough to provide this sample we can have a look at. In a second, I'll also bring in the Space Wolves Wolf Guard, a previous figure we've looked at, also from the Warhammer 40,000. But backtracking, though, just a little bit, the Ultramarines Terminator stands exactly 8 inches in height, or the figure's 20 centimeters tall. Yes, speaking of the Space Wolves, let's slide over the Ultramarine that we're about to have a look at and bring the earlier looked at Wolf Guard. You can see there's a size difference definitely between the Ultramarines Terminator and the earlier looked at Space Wolves Wolf Guard. There's also quite a different color variation as well. Where they went the more lighter pastel colors of those Space Wolves, they definitely give us a much darker approach with the blue that they used here for the Ultramarine. While the Terminator is bigger, the figure does get less accessories. The Space Wolf did benefit from having the axe as well as the additional firearm, and then of course had the backpack. We have to subtract a few of those things when we get the Ultramarines Terminator. The figure, though, granted, still comes included with a trading card. The trading card does depict, of course, the Ultramarine featured on the front, blasting away his firearm in battle. On the back, though, it does give us a nice little paragraph read you can read for yourself. Happens to also be the same thing I read at the beginning of this review. Shh, don't tell everybody or they're going to want me to do it for every single review. I do it for every single review. We're going to be adding this, though, shortly to the trading card sheet that I'm already collecting the Warhammer. I don't actually have these paired along with the DC Multiverse. I kind of keep those in separate sections for obvious reasons, but really nice little artwork there feature on the front of the card. Let's move that to the side. The figure also comes included the display stand that isn't that much different. In fact, it's exactly the same one as we got with the Wolf Guard. Printed, though, nicely on the front, we've got the Warhammer 40,000 logo on an otherwise all-black display stand that has one only peg at the top corner that can plug into either one of the feet of the Ultramarine. The figure also comes included with a gun, and I was trying my best to place exactly what kind of gun it was. I thought it was maybe, for example, the Storm Bolt, but I don't think it's that. If anybody has any ideas, let me know down below in the comments section. It does sort of look a little like the Storm Bolter, but again, I could be completely wrong. I do like the use of the additional gold that they've got here on the side that mimics, of course, the skull and the wings, something that will also carry over as well when we look at the armor here for the Ultramarine. A nice looking gun, though. It's not very heavy, though. None of it seems to be removable, so you can't take the undercarriage of the gun off, but it's a nice gun nonetheless. It does fit into his hand, although it only fits in one hand. The other hand is just a gestured hand, so it only gives you really one option to work with. I will say, though, getting the figure out of the packaging, as I do my best to get the gun now in his hand, I noticed that the hands, specifically the arms, are really loose on the figure. Let's go ahead and get the gun, first of all, in his hand. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Yeah, the arm, you'll see especially the shoulder, is very loose on the figure. I'm going to see if I could go in there. I'm sure I could probably add a little bit of floor polish. If anyone happens to have any other ideas for tightening up joints, do by all means let me know. But I do notice, though, that the arm is very loose, and it just happens to be the case that this arm has to do all the work of holding the gun, that it's only going to develop even more looseness over time. Yeah, it's very, very loose. I did also notice, like, some of the joints on this figure, like specifically his torso, this one arm also is loose. And the legs aren't as bad, although there's a lot more plastic happening here for the lower legs. Let's go ahead right now, remove the gun. We'll just put it off to the side. Getting a closer look, though, at the Ultramarines Terminator. Usually when I think of Warhammer 40,000, this is the character I think of, or specifically the Ultramarines. The clunky-looking armor that they wear, the dreadnought suits, is a nice touch. And it does make for a much heavier figure when you compare it, say, against the Space Wolves. Space Wolves was a generally heavy figure. Well, it was heavier more to the top than it was maybe to the bottom. It seems the opposite way around actually here for the Ultramarines, where he actually doesn't feel as heavy to the top, but he feels a lot more heavier down below where all the plastic, I'm sure, is probably centered. One thing I did also really like about the figure is the head sculpt that they sculpted for it. Giving him that sort of mask that they wear with this particular suit. I really like the use of the white. The white allows the chance for the red on the eyes to really pop. Kind of looks a little bit like a vacuum cleaner face. Something similar maybe to like Darth Vader, but really nice sculpted face. The paintwork is really good here. The paintwork isn't cleanest on, though, the side, where you can see he's got the skull crest. The crest is painted in gray, but you can see there's a few little areas where the blue underneath is sort of bleeding its way through. I feel, if anything, while it's nicely sculpted, and I'm glad to see that they actually did sculpt this on the shoulder rather than actually just printing it on, I do wish that a little bit of paint was afforded to it, because it's a really nice looking logo. Of course, he does have then the skull and the wings on the side. That's actually one thing I really think is painted well on the figure. Whether I do feel like there are a few little areas I feel that paint could be a little bit cleaner, the skull with the wings on the front certainly isn't one of those things I feel needs a touch up. The gold is really nicely handled here. I like as they also added some additional brushing of silver. It's something, though, that the Space Wolves really wasn't afforded, because the pastel blue really wasn't shared with any other color on the figure. Like, they didn't add any contrast in colors. They didn't add a darker wash or a lighter wash or even scratching surfaces on the metal. Instead of what they did here on the actual Ultramarines is that they painted nicely little silver there. It's actually, the silver carries over down into the abdomen area too. It's just, though, a shame that the abdomen is as loose as it is on my figure. Of course, he does have the symbol there also on the other side of his shoulder as well. These shoulders, by the way, do have poseability independently, so you can move these around. Some nice gold that he also has there on the forearms. Now, the small skulls printed here on the forearms, or molded, I should say, rather, on the forearms. Again, very nicely done. The gold seems to be the best thing that's painted well on the Ultramarines. While, again, like all the things like the gray could, I think I have used maybe just a little bit more of it. But again, you've got that carried over symbol that he also has there on his shoulder as well, which, again, is molded. It isn't simply just printed over top of the knee pad. You got some scuffing of silver added down below here by the boot. He does also have the phrase there printed on the side. It's a little hard to, in fact, make out exactly what it says. I know I also need to get myself glasses, so it makes things a little bit. From what I can see, at least, it says, "What is the terror of?" I think that's death. And then from there, of course, you may have a better time of reading this out, or if you just know it off by heart, you probably can also let me know as well. He's got some skulls there also on the sides of his form. A really nice big clunky bot. I really like the way that they've given and sculpted the suit here for the Ultramarine Terminator. Then he's also got a couple of little hoses there on the back that actually connect the bottom of his gauntlet here to the top of his bicep. You don't have to worry as much because, of course, when we look at the articulation on the figure, he has just enough clearance. But the neat thing about it, though, is when you hinge his elbows, I know we'll talk more about the figure's articulation in a second, you'll see the way that the hose actually slides inside the cavity of the forearm. So when you are moving the arm back and forth, there's nothing that's actually pulling on this, because that was one of my biggest worries was getting this figure out of the packaging, was that I knew seeing it that the rope was way too small. The little cording I thought would be ripping easily if I was to hinge the elbow back and forth, but you can see the way they very smartly have slid it in, hid it inside, like I said, the side section of his forearm. Really nice looking way they've done that. Of course, when we spin the figure around, also here on the back, you got the vents there on the back of the figure's body. Not really much in the way of paint. You'll see, in fact, most of it actually is on the front of the figure. And then, of course, he also has the little coiled suit, or the inner suit that's underneath it. This looks almost like it'd be softer plastic, but it's just as hard of a plastic as everything else that's around it. For the figure's articulation, going back first to his head sculpt, the Terminator does move back and forth and up and down. So while I would have thought, looking at this, that it wouldn't have any bit of motion at all, I thought, if anything, I'd be able to probably just do this and that's about it. But you can actually move the head up and down, although it's a little harder to kind of get in there because, of course, he's got so much stuff happening around him. The shoulders do rotate all the way around, so no problems really there. The shoulders, again, on mine at least, are a little on the looser side. If you have, lucky enough, found this figure and got them for your collection, let me know if you've also had loose shoulders and loose legs. Again, the legs aren't as bad, but notice right away that the shoulder for the Ultramarine, very, very loose. The shoulder is also one thing, speaking of which, that is on its own dedicated ball joint. I don't know if you guys can actually see it or not. Let me just move this back just a little bit. There is actually a post right here that attaches the shoulder to a ball joint on the tops of the figure's arm. So this does also move back and forth as well. You can kind of move it around. You can also shift it or slide it back around as well if you wanted to. The figure does have a swivel. The swivel isn't so much here. Well, he has it in the bicep, but then he's also got a secondary one right here in the arm, or right where the bicep, I guess it is really all one piece. The figure does have a single hinge only in the elbow, but again, I appreciate the fact that this part of the hose isn't tight enough that it's going to rip. Nice, smart way of actually engineering it where this can actually slide inside the forearm. Now the hands do rotate. This hand does not, but this hand does. I don't know why. Again, it just may have something to do with the fact that they probably just molded the relaxed hand as just part of the gauntlet. You can even really see the way they've molded the thumb right to it. There's no way really that's going to be able to move. This hand, though, on the other hand, literally does do rotate back and forth. Again, he is loose really on the top of the torso. He shouldn't really be as loose as he is immediately getting him out of the packaging. The figure does also have a secondary ball joint, but the problem with it, though, is if you're looking at the way the abdomen is, I feel like I want to keep straightening out the abdomen. See how it's kind of just leaning slightly to the side? I keep wanting to fix it, and every time that I do, when I go to start to move the figure around, it sort of starts to shift this over again. The figure does have, again, a ball joint at the base where the abdomen meets the waist. Speaking of the waist, though, the legs do split out. But he has these, let me just move these out of the way. He's got these skirtings on the sides. Now, again, the way that they attach them, they're actually attached by the belt. They're not attached to the thigh. So it doesn't mean that when you're moving the thighs out, these are going to get in the way, at least from being attached to the top of the legs. But they are still going to be getting in the way if you want to do a full splits. If you're hoping is to get the Ultramarine Terminator to do a Van Damme splits, it just isn't gonna work. Now, you can take, of course, the legs, move forward and back. The figure does have a swivel at the top of the thigh. The figure also has only possessing a single hinge in the knee. And then he also has a really good ankle pivot. I was really surprised that he would actually have as much as he did. But it does move up and down, and it does move back and forth as well. Going back to something I had mentioned earlier by bringing in the display stand, of course, he does have located on the bottoms of his feet, not one, but two peg holes, so you can have the figure displayed that way if you want. I don't think he has necessarily an issue standing, although if you wanted to have him, for example, in a running pose, see, there's the abdomen. It's just shifted a little bit. There we go. Shimming it back to where it's supposed to be. Yeah, I don't think I have an issue really necessarily with the Ultramarines Terminator standing properly, so you may not even need yourself a display stand. Granted, though, if you did want to have the figure in a running pose or a gestured pose or something other more interesting than what we're looking at right now, maybe, yes, bring in the display stand because it will certainly come in handy. Then, of course, we can bring back in the earlier looked at figure that we've already had a look at, the Warhammer 40,000 Space Wolves Wolf Guard. Yeah, I like this line. Again, when I think, though, of Warhammer 40,000, the figure I usually think of right away, or the grouping, the subcategory team I would think of right away would be Ultramarines. It's always the ones that are always advertised, it seems, on strategy guides. And when I would go to like Game Shop Workshop back in the day, Game Shop Workshop, what was the name? Game Workshop. Back in the day, and I was watching other people playing Warhammer 40,000, it was always the character I thought of right away was the Ultramarines. I think the Ultramarines has been handled nicely from McFarlane Toys. They have at least added some additional wear and tear to the suits. That wasn't necessarily the case when we looked at the Wolf Guard. But unfortunately, though, one of the things that it does benefit from having additional paint, it then sorely lacks in by not having proper tighted joints. While this figure did have much tighter joints in the shoulders, the legs, the knees, and all that. Unfortunately, though, getting this guy out of the packaging, yeah, he's really, really loose on the top. Well, he's loose in the torso right away. He's loose in the shoulders, and he's also starting to develop a little bit looseness from the tops of the thighs. But other than that, though, I say other than that, it is still a nice looking figure, and one that definitely will be going on the shelf with the already looked at Space Wolves. I decided to make use of the display stand that came included with the Ultramarines Terminator. I mean, we get one anyway, so why not use it? Todd and his team, McFarlane Toys that is one of the only few companies I can think of that include display stands with every one of the figures that they still continue to release. Whether you may end up having a big stack of stands that you never use, I'd rather have extra stands than ever needing stands, and I don't have them available. The figure does benefit from having one, and he has enough shelf appeal already with the big clunky dreadnought suit that he has and he wears. Why not put him in a more running pose? I think it does make the figure showcase a little bit nicer on the shelf. Unfortunately, though, I don't know the longevity of having the figure displayed always like this. The figure has already developed overly loose shoulders, specifically, and it had to be the one arm that was holding the gun. Like, it couldn't have been the other arm. I'm going to see if I can go in there and add a little bit of floor polish. The problem with it, though, is that he has the shoulder pad in the way, but being that the fact that the shoulder attaches with the ball joint, I'm sure I could probably detach it to get into the joint and see if I can tighten up a little bit more. I would like to have this guy at least with his arm drawn out like this, with the gun displayed on the end of his hand. But again, with the looseness that he already has, and I had to stress the fact that it may only be on my figure's arm, it may not be on everybody's. So if you were lucky enough already to pick up the Warhammer 40,000 Ultramarines Terminator, let me know if you've also had similar issues with some of the joints being overly loose. Despite its loose joints, it's a figure like, again, does show nicely on a shelf. It has a big shelf appeal to him. I like the clunky look to the armor, and even though the armor isn't as heavy as I was expecting, it seems to have certainly a lot more weight from the lower half than the earlier looked at Space Wolves Wolf Guard. What do you guys think of the Ultramarines Terminator? Let me know down below in the comments section. Big thank you once again to the folks over at McFarlane Toys that did come through and provide the sample of the brand new Warhammer 40,000 Ultramarines Terminator. If you guys did enjoy this video, why not throw it a like? If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and you'd like to stay on board for more Warhammer 40,000 reviews, I can tell you we will be looking at some more. I'd like to think that you're also coming back to this channel for other reasons, but if right now the only main reason that you're coming back is to see more Warhammer 40,000, rest assured more will be coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.